This hour on I-24 News, on the eve of his one-year anniversary in office, President Trump is now scrambling to avoid a U.S. government shutdown.
This has been a remarkable year in office for President Trump, the United States, and the entire world. We will take a look back.
Plus, Turkey just opened fire on Kurdish forces in Syria that are backed by the United States. Tensions with Washington are building.
And South Korea says it wants the North and the United States to talk and is offering to help set up a dialogue process.
From the I-24 News studios in Times Square in New York, this is Crossroads with David Schuster and Shayna Estulin.
And we've got Tal Heinrich in on this Friday. For Shayna, it's always great to have you here.
Happy Friday, David.
Happy Friday. The United States federal government is barreling towards a shutdown. Negotiations on a funding bill have not yet produced a resolution, and lawmakers on both sides are playing the blame game.
The fight is over a one-month funding bill that's already passed the House, but has no immigration fix for the so-called dreamers, thousands of U.S. children, undocumented immigrants that came here. And the Senate has come up with a bipartisan deal, but Mr. Trump has rejected it. Earlier on this day, the president called Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer to the White House in hopes of reaching a deal.
We had a long and detailed meeting. We discussed all of the major outstanding issues. We made some progress, but we still have a good number of disagreements. The discussions will continue.
They still have disagreements. Well, President Trump will mark the first anniversary of his presidency on Saturday. The same day, the U.S. government is slated to run out of money budgeted for government operations.
The president's first year in office was marred by controversies and protests, but Mr. Trump did manage to sign a new tax overhaul bill. I-24 News takes a look back at the Commander-in-Chief's first year in office.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
His team is already busy defending the claims the president and his press secretary, Sean Spicer, made about the size of the crowd at Friday's inauguration.
This was the largest audience to ever witness an inauguration, period.
The Senate using the nuclear option to confirm President Trump's nominee, Neil Gorsuch.
Trump has signed his new executive order, the new travel ban.
People being detained at airports around the country, including 11 at Kennedy Airport in Queens.
A judge in Hawaii has blocked the latest version of the Trump administration travel ban.
This ruling makes us look weak, which, by the way, we no longer are, believe me. One way or the other, Mexico is going to pay for the war.
Una y otra vez, México no pagará ningún.
President Donald Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel in a historic speech today.
The United States military has launched 59 Tomahawk cruise missiles at a Syrian air base in western Syria.
Assad choked out the lives of helpless men, women, and children.
Just the beginning. That's what North Korea is saying about its latest missile test, once again threatening Guam.
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen. My administration is putting an end to the war on coal. Clean, beautiful coal. The United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord.
We're going to sign 3 memorandums right now. The first one is withdrawal from the United States from the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
I will terminate NAFTA. We're now one step closer to liberating our citizens from this Obamacare nightmare.
The collapse of the Republican effort to repeal or replace the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare.
President Trump is very happy today after passing the first comprehensive tax overhaul in, 30 years?
34 years.
With this bill, not only do we have massive tax cuts and tax reform, we have essentially repealed Obamacare, and we'll come up with something that will be much better.
We begin with that shakeup at the White House. Sean Spicer is out.
So the White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus forced out. President Trump's chief strategist Steve Bannon is now out.
10 days on the job. That makes Anthony Scaramucci the shortest tenured communications director in the history of the White House.
There has been no collusion.
I have never met with or had any conversation with any Russian.
What confused me when I saw on television the president saying that he actually fired me because of the Russia investigation.
No collusion.
US President Donald Trump has reignited the controversy over his attitude towards white supremacy.
The alt-left that came charging at the, as you say, the alt-right, do they have any semblance of guilt?
The NFL taking a stand against President Trump's remarks, cursing players who protest the anthem.
Wouldn't you love to see one of these NFL owners, when somebody disrespects our flag, to say, get that son of a bitch off the field right now, out, he's fired. Fired!
A firestorm in Washington over the vulgar term that President Trump reportedly used in an Oval Office meeting on immigration.
Mr. President, are you a racist?
You are fake news.
Sir,
go ahead.
You are attacking our news organization.
Not
Can you give us a chance?
Your organization.
You are attacking our...
What a great piece, David. It made me smile a lot, I have to say.
Has it been just 1 year? That's a lot that got jammed in there. A lot of controversy, a lot of...
just got much older. I don't know. Well, 1 year in, Mr. Trump has definitely changed the office of the presidency and has altered long-held protocols for the commander-in-chief.
Mr. Trump vowed to break the establishment and drain the swamp, but it has created many challenges for a city and a government that is used to certain ways of getting things done. Our senior Washington correspondent, Dan Raviv, reports.
It's still here, the White House, as always, at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. But the man living and working inside, that's been very different since January 20th of last year, says Danielle Pletka at the American Enterprise Institute.
I think he has broken the mold. I think that Donald Trump has changed the tone of the presidency. I don't know for good or for not, because we don't know what comes ahead. But he certainly changed the tone. On the other hand, I do think that he's learning to better work with Congress. I do think that he's learning the job on the job.
Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan.
The president likes to do things in an unconventional way. He does it with his phone. But it actually does help us.
For a lot of Republicans, Donald Trump has been more of an albatross than he has been a leading man. He really is the leader of the Republican Party, but he doesn't feel like the leader of the Republican Party, and he has ushered in severe losses for the Republicans.
Like any president, Donald Trump has a cabinet with a Secretary of State who's a former oil company executive and a Secretary of Defense, a retired Marine Corps general. More than most presidents, Trump has had a lot of staff departures. People who knew him for many years as a real estate tycoon say Trump has always demanded total loyalty, but if doubts develop, you're out. That hasn't changed.
I don't think that Donald Trump is a fake in any way, and those who thought that he was acting on the campaign trail and that he would grow in office were wrong. This is the president that we've got, and this is the president we're going to have for as long as he's in elected office.
Trump's critics consider him unusually bad at leading this country and giving inspiration to the world. Norm Ornstein, also at the American Enterprise Institute.
He's a phony populist. He hasn't proposed much of anything that would actually help those working class people, and in fact has governed as a plutocrat, helping out the billionaires and the wealthy.
What hasn't changed is that the ruling party has big ambitions. Republicans in Congress and heading government agencies now want to put their stamp on America, to be more pro-business, also skeptical about immigration, wanting to reduce it. Democrats during the 8 Barack Obama years pushed in the other direction. That wasn't permanent. So a question. Will the changes brought by Donald Trump last beyond his presidency?
To discuss all of this, let's bring in our senior Washington correspondent, Dan Raviv, and our senior national correspondent, Michael Schur. And Michael, first to you, any irony that here we are on the eve of the president's one-year anniversary and that this chaos that we've seen repeatedly is now contributing, according to Republicans, to a possible government shutdown?
No, it's the perfect exclamation point for year one of the Trump presidency, that there is not even a clarity as to whether or not there will be government come morning. And I think that the, and you heard a lot of this in Dan's piece there, is the idea that whether or not this is an anomalous presidency or it's a presidency that's going to endure. And I think when you see all of the different ways that he has governed over this past year, it to me doesn't strike me as something that's going to change the presidency permanently, that he will in fact be something of a blip looking back, and hopefully in some regards that's true, and I think a lot of people on Capitol Hill would agree that that would probably be best.
And Dan, the president reportedly planned to spend this weekend in Florida, and he had to change his plans due to the looming shutdown.
Listen, I'm an optimist about so many things, and it includes the fact that Congress can actually fix this shutdown, if it even begins at midnight, sometime Saturday. Yes, Congress can meet on Saturday and vote on Saturday. It may seem silly, but I think it's real. Trump was planning to be at his estate and private club in Palm Beach, Florida, Mar-a-Lago, for a Saturday night Republican Party fundraiser to celebrate Trump's 1 year in office. Boy, he would love to sweep in there, even at the last minute. Can you see Congress fixing this Saturday? And then Trump flies on Air Force One down to Florida, and he gets all the applause from all those big donors to the Republican Party. And he's a TV man. I'm sure he'd love it. On the other hand, a lot of things have to happen. Some quick compromises by members of Congress. It is possible. Not likely tonight, Friday night, but Saturday it could happen. Tal and David.
Dan, is there agreement that these headaches for the president are largely of his own making? And, for example, with the government shutdown, the Democrats are holding firm to DACA. This was a program that President Trump got rid of. And as a result, the Democrats have been begging, pleading for a fix, and now they're willing to possibly say, look, fine if the government shuts down if you're not going to include this in the fix.
You would have to be a genius to figure out the timing of events, what was going to happen when Donald Trump decided to strip as many as 800,000 people who'd been brought into the U.S. generally by their parents, so they don't have papers. And Barack Obama issued them DACA, papers. They'd have to register, and then they could have jobs and study. I mean, terrific for them. And then Trump said, I'm going to take it away, but I encourage Congress to come up with a real solution as part of a big immigration plan. That's not the worst goal in the world, but of course, Congress didn't get around to it quickly. So here we got to this deadline for funding the government. Otherwise, we'll have a shutdown. That's why Democrats have decided this is their DACA moment. They're trying to take their DACA stand. Republicans don't want to let that happen. Not tonight, but it may or may not be part of a deal in the next few days. David and
Michael Schur, let's talk a bit about the blame game that is going on here. Republicans are saying that Democrats are holding this country hostage, but at the same time, they're also narrowing it down to one person, saying that it's a Schumer shutdown. And Schumer, as we heard, was invited earlier today to the White House as well to discuss it with the president. But how can it be a Schumer shutdown if the GOP controls both chambers of Congress and the White House?
Well, that's exactly the question that a lot of Democrats are asking, and polling today that was released by the Washington Post showed that, in fact, people are blaming the president and the Republicans for this. But it is crafty politics on the part of Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump to say that, listen, we do have control of both houses, and we have offered something here, but it's being held hostage over one issue, and it's an issue that we still have time to discuss. And because it's being held hostage, it's the Democrats that are keeping the government from staying open. And whether or not that resonates, there's precedent for it not resonating, especially when you see these the control that the Republicans have. But it's certainly a good argument, and it's certainly a way to keep a lot of these moderate Democrats who are up for election. I think first of Joe Donnelly of Indiana, the Democrat who has said that he will vote for the continuing resolution. It's a political ploy, and it may work in a couple of spaces, but they need to have it work in certainly 8, 9, or 10 in order to get over the hump and get this government open for the duration, or at least for 2 to 4 weeks.
Michael Schur, our senior national correspondent, and Dan Raviv, our senior Washington correspondent. Thank you both. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
Just ahead, one of President Trump's biggest foreign policy announcements over the past year involved the Middle East. The president changed U.S. policy and officially recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And the move of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem may happen a lot sooner than a lot of analysts had expected.
Plus, 3 IDF soldiers were injured after an attempted car ramming in the West Bank. The driver was arrested by police. The Trump administration is reportedly planning to transfer the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv by 2019, far sooner than the State Department previously anticipated.
According to the New York Times, the move suggests the Trump administration no longer cares about cushioning the blow of the new policy, which has drawn angry protests from Palestinians and other Muslims. I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Ellie Hochenberg is at the proposed site of where the new U.S. Embassy may be relocated.
So we are here at West Jerusalem in the Arnona neighborhood. The American consulate, long-standing American consulate, is right here in front of me. I can't show you the actual building due to security reasons, but this is the place where reportedly the embassy is likely to be moved to. Let's try to break things down because there were many conflicting reports this week that they're not necessarily contradicting one another. So earlier in the week, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that the embassy move will happen sooner rather than later, in a one-year time. A few days afterwards, President Trump said, no, this is not the case, but they were not referring to the exact same thing. What Netanyahu was talking about is a gradual move, meaning that the American ambassador, David Friedman, will move to here with part of his team and will start operating from the consulate here in Jerusalem. Trump was referring to the overall embassy relocation that might take longer. Earlier in the day, the State Department said that this is merely a speculation, but we have witnessed a lot of ongoing disagreements between the State Department and the White House, and this seems to be yet another proof of that. In any case, in a few days from now, the Vice President, Mike Pence, will arrive in Israel for an official visit. Ramallah is not on the agenda, but a speech in Parliament is definitely on, as well as meeting with the Prime Minister, the President, and a visit to the Western Wall, similarly to what President Trump did. Definitely not the usual thing on behalf of American officials, and the issue of the embassy will be part of the topics discussed, perhaps not topping the agenda, but definitely on the table. And we will be covering this much anticipated visit from the very start to the very end. For the time being, back to you in the studio from what is likely to be the new location of the American embassy in Jerusalem.
Now, to further discuss this, let's bring in our Tel Aviv correspondent, Yoav Borovitz. Yoav, what's the significance of the Arnona building in West Jerusalem?
Well, the building in Arnona Tal, which is a neighborhood in western Jerusalem, has already been used by the U.S. over the years to issue visas and provide various consular services. Converting this building to the U.S. Embassy would reduce the cost of the project and allow Ambassador David Friedman and his staff to move there as early as next year. This is according to the New York Times. Therefore, the building is significant because it can speed up the embassy move significantly. The location of the Arnona building is also important, Tal, because it sits near the Green Line, which marked Israel's borders from 1949 until the Six-Day War of 1967.
You'll have tensions in the West Bank on this day. Apparently, there was an attempted car ramming. What happened?
Yes, David, there was another attempted car ramming attack in the West Bank on Friday when a Palestinian man ran into a group of soldiers with his car after being refused entry into a popular tourist site. He then attempted to flee to the Allenby Bridge, a crossing between the West Bank and the Jordanian border, but was apprehended by Israeli security forces. IDF confirmed that one soldier was moderately injured. This incident comes as tensions are high in the region since a raid conducted by Israeli security forces in northern West Bank this week resulted in the death of one Hamas member suspected of murdering Rabbi Shevach.
And finally, Yoav, we're also hearing reports that a Palestinian family killed one of its members after Hamas leaders told them he aided for Israel?
Yes, Tal, a very interesting story. A Palestinian family said on Friday that it had killed a relative after Hamas informed them that he has aided Israel in the killing of 3 senior Hamas commanders in an airstrike during the 2014 Gaza war. The Barhoum family confirmed in a statement that a family member shot Ahmed Barhoum dead in light of their moral and religious commitment and after seeing evidence against him. Hamas praised the family for illustrating their noble and deep affiliation with the anti-Israel resistance. The Barhoum family is one of the largest families in Rafah and well known for their closeness with anti-Israel groups.
Yoav Borowitz reporting from our headquarters in the Middle East in Tel Aviv. Yoav, thank you. There are a lot of informants that Israel tries to cultivate among the Palestinians.
We can only assume that there are some people on the ground in Gaza maybe reporting to Israeli secret services. Sometimes they hold certain cards on them, so there's not much of a choice for certain individuals, or Hamas has some cards against them, so they have not much of a choice.
And any surprise with the brutality with which this family decided to kill one of their own?
There's always surprise because it's a family member, but again, Hamas is running the show there, and it's not the first time actually that Hamas has executed people allegedly for collaborating with Israel. Well, coming up, Turkey has begun its offensive in Syria against Kurdish forces they consider terrorists, but the U.S. calls allies versus ISIS.
Plus, South Korea is looking to build on recent diplomatic momentum. First, they got North Korea to pledge to march with them at the upcoming Olympics, and now it looks to bring Pyongyang and Washington to a negotiating table. More on that ahead. In defiance of U.S. wishes, the Turkish army is on the brink of a land offensive across its border with Syria in the Kurdish-controlled enclave of Afrin. The area is controlled by Kurdish fighters who played a significant role in the fight against Islamic State, but Turkey has long considered the group to be terrorists.
Turkey has also threatened to launch a full invasion on Afrin. The U.S. has called on Turkey to stand down, but Turkey's defense minister said that their operation was already underway. For more, let's bring in senior diplomatic correspondent Nina Larson. Nina, tensions between the U.S. and Turkey are running very high at the moment over this planned security force. Is the U.S. trying to stop this potential Turkish invasion?
Yes, they are. And in diplomatic terms, Tal, there's been a lot of confusion this week that has enraged Turkey about these reports concerning a proposed U.S.-backed, U.S.-armed Kurdish security force, a border force in that area. And the State Department today actually was at great pains to walk these remarks back and try to clarify them. They're characterizing this force not as border security now, but as a multi-ethnic, not just Kurdish, local security force that's aimed in the longer term at getting civilians back into their homes, at supporting NGOs that go back there, and really more of a local force. But again, Turkey is very much on the brink now. You've seen those forces massing on the border, and there's been substantial shelling across the border. So you really have to keep a very, very close eye on this situation at the moment.
And Nina, we understand that some Turkish military representatives have been in Moscow trying to consider Russia's interest in these areas. What's the latest?
Well, that's the big question, David. Has Moscow given the green light for this? And they would have to, because as you said quite rightly, Russia has military observers on the ground there, and Russia controls the airspace. The first real indication in real terms would be an air offensive, and we're waiting to see if that develops over the weekend. The State Department also watching this very, very closely. The U.S. does not want this conflict to happen. And we actually heard firsthand from the Russian foreign minister here at the United Nations earlier today. He denied those reports that military observers from his country had been pulled back out of Afrin. But having said that, he wouldn't elaborate any further, and he wouldn't deny that the Turks were ready to go. So I don't know what to make of that. I think perhaps there might have been a green light from Moscow. Again, we'll have to wait and see. And on the peace talk side of things in Syria, we're expecting in Vienna next week. They're usually held in Geneva. But in Vienna, there'll be a fresh round of talks by the United Nations. And for once, the United States and Moscow are on the same page with all of this. Both of them today saying that Assad leaving is not a precondition. The U.S. in particular saying They want the fate of Assad to be left to the Syrian people. They want the peace talks to continue. They want free and fair elections. And they're concluding that those elections will result in Assad being pushed out.
And moving to another diplomatic crisis for the United States, Nina, North Korea, regional reports saying that South Korea hopes the truce between North and South during the Winter Olympics next month should pave the way for direct talks.
Well, this is a regional newspaper report, but having said that, they're quoting South Korean officials and an official policy paper, so this could be what South Korea is indeed hoping for. They seem to be a lot more optimistic now after this détente over the Olympics, but at the same time, reports out that North Korea is planning a big military parade the night before the opening ceremony that would key in with their usual PR tactics, and the U.S. as well very much on their guard with all of this.
Nina Larson, our senior diplomatic correspondent reporting from the United Nations. Nina, thank you. Do you have a sense as to whether or not the Olympic rapprochement between the North and South might lead to direct talks between the United States and the North?
I'm very doubtful, but actually I read some report on Reuters today saying that North Korea has canceled the planned visit of some artistic delegation to South Korea, and they gave no reason for the cancellation.
Interesting.
So,
Interesting.
yeah, things are shaky.
Coming up, we will continue our reports noting the 1 year since President Donald Trump has been in office.
And we'll take a look at how his foreign policy has changed the world. But first, headlines from our headquarters in Tel Aviv. Welcome back. You're watching Crossroads here on I-24 News. 1 year ago, Saturday, Donald Trump took the oath of office on the steps of the U.S. Capitol. No one knew what he would do, least of all in the Middle East. Trump had no experience in government.
Yeah, during the campaign, he talked tough about defending Israel and was outspoken against Iran. The president's motto, though, overall was America first. But many of his policies have ended up shaking things up a lot in the Middle East in particular. Our senior international affairs correspondent, Owen Alterman, has more.
The Middle East, January 2018. The Palestinians furious, Israel elated, a Saudi crown prince on the rise, an Iran that may be on the rise too, ISIS all but defeated, Russia with more influence than ever. And you could argue it's all because of this man.
It is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. The Iran deal was one of the worst and most one-sided transactions the United States has ever entered into. Frankly, that deal is an embarrassment. We want to thank you and Saudi Arabia, but hundreds of billions of dollars of investments into the United States.
1 year after taking office, U.S. President Donald Trump has shaken up the Middle East. On Jerusalem, on the Iran nuclear deal, on funding for Palestinian refugees, Trump has changed U.S. policy. On Saudi Arabia, he has put the United States on the side of ascendant Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. But some of Trump's actions, especially in Syria, point to a different approach, much more in line with past U.S. President Barack Obama, keeping Americans mostly out of the Syrian war and out of making Syrian peace. In most of Syria, that has left Iran, Turkey, and Russia in charge.
Thanks to the efforts of Russia, Iran, and Turkey, it was possible to prevent the disintegration of Syria, to prevent its capture by international terrorists.
The state of play in Syria has brought Iran to the border on the Golan Heights. Iranian proxies, even Iranian soldiers, just miles away from where the Israeli army sits, with Iran trying to set up permanent bases on Syrian territory.
We are making an effort to prevent this consolidation on the northern border, both through military efforts and international efforts.
So is Donald Trump's America squeezing the Palestinians, dancing with Saudi Arabia, and taking on Iran? Or is this an America First plan, with the U.S. backing away from the Middle East mess? 1 year into the Donald Trump era, it's not clear. But in 2018, Middle Easterners from Jerusalem to Riyadh to Damascus to Tehran will be looking to find out. Owen Alterman, I-24 News.
Let's bring in Omar Dajani, a former member of the PLO Negotiation Support Unit and a professor of law at the University of Pacific. Professor, thanks so much for joining us. Should anybody be surprised that because Donald Trump said during the campaign he was going to name Jerusalem the capital of Israel, move the U.S. embassy there, that he actually followed through his first year in office?
I don't think it's surprising if one pays attention to what he said. But it is surprising insofar as American presidents have routinely made promises of that kind through the years and have had the good judgment during their administrations and the good advice to step back from promises of that kind. So it's a disappointment, if not a surprise.
Right now, the U.S. administration and the Palestinians, as we see, are at a very low point of their relations. Do you think it's reversible?
I think it is reversible, but it's going to take some work. I think that Palestinians are rightly skeptical about the United States' role, not just because of the United States' recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, but also because of the perception that the United States isn't serious about playing a fair role as mediator in peace talks. The Obama administration played a less than perfect role, but whereas the Obama administration seemed at times to lack the courage of its convictions, the Trump administration seems to lack convictions entirely, and I think Palestinians are left scratching their head to understand what the new rules of the game are.
Some of those rules, at least for the Trump administration, seem to be to lean more heavily on countries like Saudi Arabia to try to perhaps force this sort of fix in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. What do you make of that strategy?
I think that it's a misguided strategy. I think that Saudi Arabia has some influence, but Mohammed bin Salman, the putative leader of the country, has had so far a series of failures with respect to almost every part of his foreign policy strategy, whether we're talking about Syria or Yemen or Qatar or Lebanon. And I think that it's a mistake for the United States, A, to assume that MBS, as he's called, is going to wield enormous influence in this context, and also to assume that the Palestinians can simply be coerced into taking a different line than we have for the last 25 years in peace talks.
Trump is a businessman, and it's very hard to disconnect the financial aspect of his foreign policy, as we've seen it happening with the Palestinians, UNRWA, and Pakistan. Trump is basically sort of saying, if you're taking American dollars, you should also comply with American interests. Where do you stand on this matter? What do you think about this?
I think it's not so much the fact that Trump is a businessman as the fact that he is someone who is not only uninformed about the world, but also both uninterested in and uncomfortable in the world. I think that what we are seeing is the largest American withdrawal of soft power in a century. It is moving away from all of the traditional non-hard power ways in which the United States has wielded influence. And perhaps that's in part because the president is skeptical about the capacity of that soft power to make change in the world. But I think that what we're seeing with respect to UNRWA, for example, is a classic case of the United States giving up an incredibly useful asset. I mean, we're talking about an organization that is primarily involved in health, education, and social services, and that serves an incredibly important role in the absence of a resolution of the conflict in keeping people's lives normal and keeping the conflict from being further stoked. To take a step back from supporting an organization of that kind for the narrow reasons that he's offered so far seems just like bad policy to me.
All right, Omar Dajani, former member of the PLO Negotiation Support Unit and a professor of law at the University of Pacific. Professor, thanks for your thoughtful contribution to the broadcast. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Yep. Thoughts?
Some interesting points. I think regarding to his last answer, that certain Middle Eastern countries, certain leaders around the Middle East, they wanted to see such a U.S. administration that is somewhat less keen on intervening in their internal affairs. But it depends who you're asking in the Middle East. It seems like Trump has this strategy of having an alliance with the moderate Muslim countries like Egypt, like Saudi Arabia, that the Obama administration somewhat failed, both with the Iran deal and in the case face of President Sisi basically failed to recognize his regime after the coup that ousted Morsi.
And maybe not just the leaders in the region. I mean, a lot of Americans have also long been skeptical of the U.S. involvement and what the United States has done in the Middle East. But it is so interesting, and I think the professor's point is right on, that when you do leave more authority to, say, the Saudi crown prince, his mistakes then do get multiplied and provide an opportunity for Russia and Iran to start filling the vacuum where the United States and Saudi Arabia may be making some mistakes.
And we'll continue to talk about the Middle East next, but from a different point of view. The Academy Awards are just a few weeks away, and for the second year in a row, documentaries about Syria are set to make a big showing.
Plus, zoo officials in Kenya have set up an online dating profile for an endangered rhino that is apparently looking for love. So it looks like this is going to be another very big year at the Academy Awards for Syria.
Several films about the country have made it onto the documentary shortlist for this year's Oscars. I-24 News correspondent Daniel Campos has more.
Showtime! The 90th Academy Awards are around the corner, and Syria's back on the spotlight of the Oscar documentary shortlist. 3 of the 15 documentaries on the shortlist are about Syria. Chinese dissident artist Ai Weiwei's Human Flow focuses on the refugee crisis.
I jumped into this topic in refugee situation. I tried almost desperately to make a shout, to make my voice to be heard. Here, look at here, what's happening.
Award-winning American director Matthew Heineman's City of Ghosts focuses on a group of Syrian rebels who call themselves Raqqas being slaughtered silently, and who risk their lives to document atrocities committed by the Islamic State in their homeland. Syrian director Feras Fayyad's Last Man in Aleppo offers powerful insights into the daring rescue work of the White Helmet volunteers.
The main characters are fathers and brothers. They are people that have been facing challenges where they could be digging up rubble as first responders to bombings, and they could find their siblings or children under this rubble. So it's a huge threat to anyone to remain in this place, and it shows these people's resilience to remain in their country and achieve peace despite the fact that this place could result in their death and the death of their families.
This is not the first film about the White Helmets to be nominated for an Oscar. Last year, the documentary titled The White Helmets took home the Oscar for Best Documentary Short Subject and became Netflix's first Oscar win. But despite the positive reputation of the White Helmets in most Western media, the organization has been the target of a campaign by supporters of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and Russian-sponsored media organizations such as Russia Today, whose claims of close ties was terrorist activity.
The bright side of being shortlisted for the Oscars is that it will lend more importance and put a spotlight on the film's topic, which is the importance of stopping the war in Syria.
It is not clear yet which of the 3 films will qualify for the final shortlist of 5 nominees, to be announced on January the 23rd. The winner will be crowned at the Oscar ceremony on March 4th. Daniel Campos, I-24 News.
Wow, the courage you were saying to be able to go to Syria to shoot a film in the midst of everything going on.
Yeah, I have no clue how. Sometimes they use materials. I know because I interviewed once the White Helmets, the other movie that won the Oscars, the creators, and they said that they used materials from people on the ground. They didn't go there personally, but people provide them with materials. And there's so many stories that will be told once everything, well, it's a long way to go until we get there. Well, this next story is totally different. He's the world's only surviving white male rhino, and he just got on to the dating scene.
And now zoo officials in Kenya have created an online dating profile in the hopes of raising enough money to start a breeding program. Sarah Martinez has the story.
He's best described as a dude that likes to chill. At 6 feet tall, he tips the scale at over 5,000 pounds. Meet the latest eligible bachelor to hit Tinder looking for love. Sudan is the world's only surviving male northern white rhino. His entire species has been wiped out to the brink of extinction by poachers for their horns. Today, he's guarded by keepers around the clock at the Old Pejeta Conservancy in Kenya, along with 2 females, Fatou and Najin. Conservationists hope to mate Sudan, but at the grand old age of 44, he's having a hard time delivering.
Problem with the hind leg, as we can see him. The hind legs, he has got very weak joints for now, of which he cannot make sure jump or mount on a female.
So the Conservancy teamed up with a public relations company to raise funds for an IVF breeding program that scientists hope will save the species. As part of the campaign, Sudan was listed on dating app Tinder, giving people the option to donate money when they opened his profile.
The amount of attention we got out of it, it was amazing. I mean, for example, our website crashed in the first 3 hours. In terms of the money raised, we were aiming to raise about $1 million, and we raised about $85,000, which was a bit disappointing. We were really hoping to raise more money than that. But in terms of publicity and putting Sudan on the map, or people understanding what's going on with rhinos, I think it was a great success.
The last 3 remaining rhinos on the planet are growing older as scientists race against time to bring the beautiful species back to life. So next time, think before you swipe left. Sarah Martinez, I-24 News.
Well, if I'm on Tinder and suddenly I see a rhino, it's like, surprising. It's a brilliant idea.
I didn't realize there's such a thing as hippo IVF. And for people who know about IVF, there's some things that have to happen along the way.
I thought you were about to say I didn't realize that there's such a thing as Tinder, but David.
No, I'm just trying to go through the whole sort of mental process of how do they get the sample into the...
Well, all right, but it's good to see that dating apps are all around the world in Sudan. People are looking for love.
Yes. Still ahead, Prince William, who's already found love. He has unveiled a new haircut, and it's a very dramatic, look at that. It's a very dramatic change from how we were used to seeing him. That's how we used to see him. You'll not believe how we see him now.
Meanwhile, David, this is not a rare sight. Russian President Vladimir Putin joins thousands of Orthodox Christians around the world who are marking the Epiphany. Britain's Prince William showed off a new haircut, and it's got a lot of people reacting. Take a look. The prince sported a dramatic buzz cut, which is a lot shorter than how he usually wears it.
The price for the new Chrome Dome? We're told that the prince reportedly paid a whopping $250 for that?
That's a lot.
He used his wife Kate's hairstylist. The price of the haircut had a lot of people on social media going wild. Here's how some people responded. John wrote, I buzz my hair at home, cost $40 for the clipper. Pierre asked, does that include the tip? And finally, someone else pointed out that if you're loyal to a haircutter, then you have to pay their price, regardless of how intricate the do may be. Doesn't seem fair.
I can understand, actually.
Just take some clippers and zoom, and he's done.
No, it's totally funny. Yeah, is it taxpayer money? I don't know. I'm just wondering.
It's royal money. But,
if it would have been in the U.S., it would have done a lot of, buzz.
I think it's better for him, this new haircut, than the old style. I mean, it kind of gives him a little more aerodynamic look.
I agree with you. Anyway. As long as, Kate likes it.
That's...
All right, we have lots more coming up here on Clear Cut with Michelle McCory. Michelle, can we get a preview?
Yeah, Tal, I like the prince's hair and someone else's hair that always gets a lot of attention. President Trump, will love him or hate him, his first year in office has seen the economy flourish, unemployment at record lows, stock markets at record highs, and GDP growing at more than 3% faster than the last 2 Obama years. So can he take credit? Would this have happened under a Clinton presidency? We will debate on Clear Cut, and we'll also take a look at how Trump has impacted the Middle East. And, of course, we'll have the latest on the looming government shutdown. It's back to you guys.
All right. Millions of Orthodox Christians around the world are celebrating the Epiphany by taking an icy plunge into freezing waters.
And one of the people taking part in the ritual this year was Vladimir Putin. The Russian president stripped to his bathing trunks, crossed himself, and dipped his head twice into the water. Each year on Epiphany, Orthodox believers immerse themselves in rivers and lakes to commemorate the baptism of Jesus Christ. That does it.
You know, and he's doing it in, they essentially cut a hole in the ice so that he can do it. And a lot of people like scream and shriek, and he's just so calm.
The big ceremony takes place in the Jordan River.
Oh,
that's
well,
a huge celebration.
This one, did you ever see the television show Friends?
Yes, of course.
Are you familiar with? I was going to say something about, I'm not going to go there. Forget it.
Well, but yeah.
Alice Hennigan knows what I'm talking about. It rhymes with linkage. I'm just saying.
All right, and that does it for this hour of Crossroads.
Stay with us tonight, 24 News, for much more ahead. We'll be right back.